Have a good day. In 1348, the English town of Newcastle was so filthy that its citizens had to flee. They were sick of the stench of stale urine and feces that permeated everything. The city was overcrowded and unsanitary. Waste would pile up in the streets, and people would just kind of walk around in it. They didn't have toilets. People would go in the corner of rooms or out in the street. Sometimes they would throw their waste out the window. And if you were an unsuspecting passerby, you might get hit in the head with a, well, you know what? If you were an unsuspecting passerby, you might get hit in the head with a piece of excrement. And there was really no relief from that. There was no air freshener for the time period. So people tried other things. They put flowers in the latrines to mask the smell, which must have been quite a challenge considering the temperature in England. During the summer can reach over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, we don't talk about that very much, do we? But yeah, summers in England can be pretty hot. In medieval times, people would bathe together in huge communal baths. It was a social event. People would bring their friends and family, and they would all bathe together. Sometimes people would share towels and not wash them afterwards. So if you had a friend who was really sweaty or had a lot of body odor, you might want to avoid that towel. Blood and guts were just kind of left out in the open. So if you were walking through the city, you might have to step over buckets of blood and guts. These buckets would often be left in the street, in the corner of a room, or even hanging from a wall. Again, no air freshener. So the stench of death permeated everything. If you were a wealthy homeowner, you might have a privy in your home, a fancy toilet for the time period. They would often be made of wood and decorated with carvings. But these were few and far between. Most people just kind of dealt with it as best they could. People would urinate in the street and then use the urine for cleaning and other domestic purposes. You might think that's disgusting, but back then, people didn't really think about it much. They just kind of accepted that that's how things were. In 1346, a ship arrived in England carrying what we now know as the Black Death. The plague would eventually kill 30 to 50% of Europe's population. And with all the waste and filth in the cities, conditions were ripe for the spread of disease. Rats and fleas carried the plague, and they thrived in filthy conditions. People were dying left and right. And when they died, they were thrown into mass graves. Sometimes entire families would die. And if you were a survivor, you might come back to your home to find your family dead in their beds. And then you would have to carry their corpses out of your home and throw them in a mass grave. Survivors often dug up the bodies of their loved ones because land was scarce, and they needed to use the land for crops. This is why some people started wearing masks over their faces, because they didn't want to breathe in the stench of the dead. They were trying to avoid the smell of death. So yeah, life during the Dark Ages wasn't easy, but at least there was never a shortage of jobs. Hope that cheered you up a little bit. Good night.